Now I think that now is the time to start for this very exciting workshop. Um, First of all, welcome to our side event. Welcome to Japan Pavilion. We're very happy to have you today. My name is Makoto Kato. I am happy to serve as the moderator of this meeting today. Welcome to the HFC Lifecycle Management Workshop under QChamp. We would like to inform you about that this event is very meaningful to drive our efforts in the cooling sector to control very powerful global warming gas, which is hydrofluorocarbons, HFC. So we are here gathered with many different partners, but today we have the Ministry of the Environment, and also we have the US government and Australian government. And unfortunately, due to the negotiation, we're missing for the Indian government, but we have 4 different governments gathered for this event. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Ono Hiroshi, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, Japan. So Ono-san, can I have your as the first opening remark of speakers?
Thank you very much for your introduction, and your excellencies and distinguished guests, friends and colleagues from the world. Welcome to our event, HFC Lifecycle Management Workshop under QChamp. I'd like to talk about the QChamp later a little bit. And I'm Ono Hiroshi, Vice Minister for Global Environment Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, Japan. And I would like to say a few words at the beginning of this important event. Last May, the Quad countries, namely Australia, India, the US, and Japan, confirmed our determination to further advance practical cooperation in addressing climate change. Quad countries are continuing in our effort to provide support for Indo-Pacific partners, considering their growing needs for transition to a net zero economy and society and enhancing resilience. To meet these needs, Quad countries launched the Quad Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Package at the QChamp. And hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, are one of the most powerful GHGs. Quad countries recognize their life cycle management as an essential action area under the QChamp mitigation pillars. As the demands for cooling appliances and cold chain infrastructure grow in response to the warming weather and growing economies. So to HFCs that are commonly used as refrigerants of these appliances. Now, as many as 444 countries have ratified the Kigali Amendment to limit the production and use of HFCs. I would like to extend my welcome and appreciation to the USA for your ratification of Kigali Amendment very recently. So congratulations on your achievement. Many developing countries strive to prepare for the first freeze in 2024, while developed countries are required to achieve a 40% HFC consumption reduction. Such an international effort is necessary to limit and reduce the HFCs emissions globally, which is estimated to avoid 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius warming by 2100 with the compliance of the amendment. However, I must point out that there are still severe challenges remaining, which we call HFC bank issue, namely the vast amount of HFCs remaining in equipment, such as air conditioner and refrigerator, will eventually be released into the atmosphere if we do not take care of them in an appropriate manner. To address this bank issue with a view to contributing to the global net zero emission efforts under the Paris Agreement, the Ministry of the Environment, Japan, has been promoting concrete actions based on the life cycle management approach with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, CCAC, and the ASEAN Development Bank, ADB. For example, Vietnam adopt new legislations to introduce regulations on the recovery and destruction of HFCs. In several cities of Cambodia, a training on refrigerant recovery for technicians are carried out, which with the textbook written in the local language. I am impressed that now countries are accelerating the actions to reduce HFCs emissions in their domestic policy and increasing their ambition on HFC emission reduction in their NDC as well as long-term strategy. Today, I'm glad to see important players in the field have gathered at this event, including those from Quad countries. I hope today's discussion will provide a useful opportunity to share our knowledge and experiences of tackling HFCs emissions. By shedding a light on HFCs as an indispensable area of work, we can further strengthen our efforts toward a net zero emission world. So please enjoy the event, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Ono, for your very encouraging remarks to start our event. Thank you very much again. Now, I would like to welcome Ms. Gabrielle Dreyfus, who's a member of the CCAC Scientific Advisory Panel on Climate and Clean Air Coalition to deliver her keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Makoto. Distinguished guests, first, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event, the Ministry of the Environment Japan, and the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center. I'm here on behalf of Martina Otto, the head of Secretariat of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. My name is Gabrielle Dreyfus, and I'm the chief scientist with the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. There we go. And what we're talking about is your refrigerator, your air conditioner, your car. What may seem like an esoteric topic, hydrofluorocarbon life cycle management, is a very important and a very real lever to slow warming in this decisive decade. We heard that the Montreal Protocol will avoid, or in particular the Kigali Amendment, up to 0.5 degrees of warming by the end of the century. What you already have in your refrigerator, your car, your air conditioner is not covered. Once it is in those appliances, it is up to you, and more importantly, your governments, to put in place the policies so that you know where to do with it. Or if you're replacing your air conditioner, the person who is replacing it knows what to do with those hydrofluorocarbons. So taking a step back, the CCAC, on which I serve on the scientific advisory panel, is a coalition of the working. We like to get work done. It brings together governments, scientists, and practitioners like you here today to tackle short-lived climate pollutants, which are tens to thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide at warming our atmosphere. And many cases are also air pollutants responsible for killing millions of people each year. Hydrofluorocarbons are a special case. These are industrial gases and chemicals. They are hundreds to thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide at heating the atmosphere. But they only last, on average, about 15 years in our atmosphere. And it's this combination of potency and short lifetime that make this such an important lever. Because if we can work together to learn from each other to put in place the policies and programs that work to capture, collect, recycle, and destroy those potent chemicals that are in your cars, your refrigerators, and your air conditioners, and those that you will buy, we can slow warming in the crucial coming decades significantly. The CCAC, Japan, and other members have been working to raise awareness of this opportunity. And they were actually instrumental in recognizing that demand for hydrofluorocarbons was rising rapidly, which helped lay the foundation for the 2016 Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. And with the recent ratification of the United States, as we heard, there are now 144 countries that have ratified the Kigali Amendment, including all the members of the Quad. And by setting a schedule for the phase down of high global warming potential, the production and consumption, I want to be really clear, there's an important distinction here. What the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment do is they control the upstream production and consumption of these chemicals. What we're talking about here today is once those chemicals exist, once they're in the world, how do we avoid them leaking into the atmosphere? How do we control their emissions? And so the Montreal Protocol and Kigali, by controlling that upstream production and consumption, already has made a tremendous impact, not only by putting the stratospheric ozone layer on the path to recovery, but also by curbing demand for these extremely potent climate gases, avoiding up to 2.5 degrees, 2.5 by the end of the 21st century. And that's because of the gases themselves, but also by protecting the stratospheric ozone layer, reducing the ultraviolet damage that would have reduced the ability of forests to capture, sequester carbon, those sinks, damaging the sinks. So, as I was saying, the work of the Montreal Protocol and Kigali Amendment is not yet done, as we were hearing. The purpose of the initiative on fluorocarbon lifecycle management that Japan launched at COP25 and this workshop today is to tackle what is left. And that is the emissions of these chemicals once they are produced. And for this, the CCAC partnered with Japan, the Ministry of Environment, to produce a resource book. And I highly recommend you go find this because it actually has concrete examples, 22 examples of policies and programs from across over a dozen countries that are intersecting the life cycle of these chemicals from production, when they get put into the appliances, your cars, your refrigerators, your air conditioning, and your heat pumps. Hey, everyone here, heat pumps, it's a brand new thing. It's very exciting. If you want to talk about heat pumps, come talk to me. I'm a total nerd. But as we push heat pumps, these are equipment that also contain, in many cases, high global warming potential HFCs. So this resource book has examples of how policies and programs already are working. Japan is a leader in this space with obligations to collect, recycle, or destroy these chemicals at the end of the useful life of these products. So the key message, if there's anything I want you to take away from today, is that there are measures that are currently being applied that are working at different stages of the life cycle of these refrigerants, and that the goal here is this workshop is to talk about expanding the use of what works to other countries and to get implementation to address these downstream emissions. At the same time as Kigali and the Montreal Protocol are forcing the measures, are coming into force to curb production. So in closing, I just want to remind everyone why we are here at this workshop, at this COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. It is already above more than 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial. We are all experiencing it. You cannot avoid it if you turn on the news or read your newspaper or Twitter, whatever you use, that we're already experiencing severe impacts of climate change. We are likely to exceed 1.5 degrees of warming by the early 2030s. This may sound like just a 50% increase in the warming we're already experiencing, but it will be more than that, because my background is in climate science and looking at past climate over the last million years. And what we know is in the climate system, there are feedbacks and tipping points that once triggered will accelerate these impacts and this warming. And so what we fear is the future we fear is non-linear. It's not just this slow progression that economists put into their models. Don't trust economists, by the way, and apologies if there are economists out there, we can talk later. But what we know from the IPCC is that every fraction of a degree avoided matters. It matters for our economies, it matters for our families, it matters for our industry and for civilization itself. And what we're talking about here is about 1/10 of a degree, 0.1 degrees Celsius by 2050, if we were to do this right, according to the scientific assessment panel of the Montreal Protocol. So just in closing, the workshop we're here for today, HFC Lifecycle Refrigeration Management, has a key role to play in cutting hydrofluorocarbon emissions. As part of this sprint, we're running multiple races at the same time. We have to slow warming this decade. We're already experiencing these severe impacts. We have to win this sprint. We have to turn that curve on warming. We have to slow it if we are going to have the time to win the marathon, which is decarbonization. And ultimately stabilize our climate so that it is safe for current and future generations. Today is all about climate and generational justice. That is also what we're talking about here today. So I want to thank everyone here for your efforts to turn this challenge into an opportunity. Again, this is a real lever. We have examples. We know how to do this. And so with that, I would like to thank the organizers again. Makoto, back to you.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for a very powerful message to all of us. I think what this is really encouraging word. So she's a scientist, as she said, so that well, we've been working on this life cycle management also to address bank issue. And I think this is something what we can do in a very short term. And I think the cooling sector is indispensable for our life, especially in many developing economies. The demand is expanding, so that this is where we are going to tackle together. All right, thank you very much, Gabrielle. Again, now and we're going to dive into the second session. Well, the second session is where we are listening to countries' experience. And to start for the second session, I would like to invite Ms. Osawa Yurie. She's a Deputy Director, Office of Fluorocarbons Control Policy, Ministry of the Environment, Japan. She's going to talk about what Japan's efforts on life cycle management, including for HFCs. So Osawa-san, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos-san, for introducing me. And hello, good afternoon to the distinguished panelists and participants. I'm Yurie Osawa, a Deputy Director for the Office of Fluorocarbons Control Policy from the Ministry of Environment, Japan. As a host of this side event, I am presenting how Japan addresses the HFC's emission domestically and globally in the life cycle management approach. Next slide, please. Let me start with the impact that HFC's emission would cause. Some may wonder what it is and how it would impact the climate change. Actually, Gabriel put it beautifully, concisely, and powerfully, but let me try explaining with my word. So HFCs or hydrofluorocarbons are man-made gases that are often used as a refrigerant of freezers, refrigerators, and air conditioners, including car air conditioning as well. HFCs is one of the greenhouse gases to be reported to the UNFCCC under the Paris Agreement, and actually, it is a very, very potent gas to the global warming, given the enormous power of the gas as high as 100 to 10,000 times. The number of the air conditioning are expected to become triple in coming 30 years to address the needs and demands, especially in developing countries. So to limit the production and the consumption of the HFCs, the international community successfully reached the agreement in 26 called Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which is so-called the most successful environmental agreement in history. With the steady implementation of this Kigali Amendment in both developed and developing countries, we are confident of preventing global warming by 0.4 degrees by the end of the century. And also it will promote innovation. Next slide, please. So Kigali Amendment itself is a great deal. However, we can do more. The phase down the HFCs is gradually stepping up, which means you can still buy your you can still use and buy the refrigerators and air conditioning containing HFCs gases. The gases continue to be released into the atmosphere through the leakage in use and inappropriate treatment in disposal. Imagine the tremendous volume of HFCs now containing in the equipment are waiting to be released unless they are properly addressed. We call this issue as HFC banks. Also, appropriate management of HFCs bank would transform HFCs bank into a real bank where you can save up your money. For example, refrigerant leakage prevention would help maintaining ideal energy performance of your appliances, which would save up not only electricity bill, but also fee for topping up the refrigerant. So now I'd like to introduce Japan's approach to address the HFC's emissions. First off, actually in our country's inventory, HFC's emission is increasing each year. Why? Due to the refrigerant transition from ozone depleting substances, which is controlled by the Montreal Protocol. The latest figure shows that HFC's emission consists of 4.5 of Japan's total greenhouse gases emissions in 2020s. And most of the HFC's emission come from the refrigeration and air conditioning. So Japan as a country aiming 46% greenhouse gas reduction in 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050, the effort towards HFC reduction is of course inevitable to be enhanced too. Thus, in Japan's NDC, we have set out our HFC's emission reduction goal as a 55% reduction by 2030 compared to 2013 level by employing the life cycle management approach. Also, HFC's emission is one of various areas aiming to carbon neutrality by 2050. In order to achieve this ambitious goal, Japan commits to the steady implementation of the Kigali Amendment, as well as promoting the life cycle management of fluorocarbons that has been institutionalized in our legal framework. So Japan employs two different but relevant roles to control the use of fluorocarbons, including HFCs and ozone depleting substances. Ozone layer protection law is the embodiment of the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment to reduce the consumption of the gases. And the Act on Rational Use and Proper Management of Fluorocarbons aim to prevent leakage, recover or correct refrigerants, and destroy or recycle the recovered refrigerant through mandate checkups and report of the leakage, technician registration, and mandate recovery of the refrigerant in disposal. The life cycle management of fluorocarbons, we believe, completes these 4 steps, including consumption reduction, leakage prevention, refrigerant recovery, and refrigerant destruction or recycling. Finally, I would like to mention that Japan is also committing to the international cooperation on HFCs management by launching the Initiative on Fluorocarbons Lifecycle Management, also called the IFL, with the cooperation of 15 countries and international governmental organization. This Japan-led initiative aims to promoting the global awareness on the importance of the life cycle management of the refrigerants, cooperation on strengthening policy and legal measures, including integrating HFCs into their GHGs inventory and NDC, providing capacity building training to the officials and technicians, and also implementing HFCs recovery and destruction project in developing countries, namely in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Philippines, using joint crediting mechanism or JCM scheme. Next. So also the IFL in collaboration with the CCAC, which is Gabriel lastly mentioned, published the resource book for the life cycle management of fluorocarbons last March. This publication contains 20 good practices of fluorocarbons life cycle management from around the world with the hope to contribute to the replication in other countries. So I'll stop here and I look forward to strengthening our cooperation between countries on fluorocarbons life cycle management through this workshop at this COP27. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osawa-san, for providing a very rich contents of the program of the initiative on life cycle management of fluorocarbons. I think this is a very powerful initiative. Well, that has been joined by many countries and international organizations. And I think that based on the domestic experiences from Japan, well, now our partner countries, namely, well, she mentioned, well, like in case of Vietnam, Cambodia, and other countries, well, they have been actually institutionalizing the life cycle management approach of fluorocarbons domestically. So that is actually the very first success, but we are sure we want to go more. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to discuss here. Okay, then I would like to invite my friend from Australia, Mr. Sam Low, who is the Project Director, International Clean Energy Partnership and Exports, Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment, and Water. So Sam, can I have you on the floor?
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Do I have some slides coming? Yeah, awesome. Hello. For those who are looking at the program, I was meant to be David Higgins. The difference is he has a massive big beard. I'm not David Higgins, Sam Low, but pleasure to be here. I want to thank Japan for hosting this as always. They always put on really, really good events. I'm particularly pleased to be here with our colleagues from America and Japan government and India as well. So for my presentation today, sorry, just working out how to change the slides. You do it? Yeah, great, thank you. My talk today is going to be covering two main things. I think the first one, and this is something that both discussions have talked on so far about why managing HFC emissions is so important to global emissions. And I think that's the importance bit, but also how productive those efforts can be in mitigating global warming, but also talk you through Australia's approach to managing HFC emissions. In talking through Australia's approach, I think the thing that I want to highlight in my presentation is the really the important role that partnerships between government and industry can play in taking effective action. Next slide. So while HFCs are only a small part of global greenhouse gas emissions, they're also a very important part. They're growing faster than any of the other greenhouse gases included in the Paris Agreement, as a result of a number of reasons, but primarily rapidly expanding use of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment in all parts of the world, and of course, efforts to replace ozone-depleting gases, which have been phased out under the Montreal Protocol. When the HFC phase down was agreed in 2016, John Kerry said, "It is likely the single most important step we could have taken at this moment to limit the warming of our planet and limiting the warming for generations to come." And I think a very prescient point that our American colleague made. The Montreal Protocol will reduce HFC emissions by 85% by gradually turning down the tap on production of those chemicals. But we can do more by managing and reducing HFC emissions during equipment life and when equipment reaches its end of life. So what's the opportunity? There are four main ways to reduce HFC emissions. The first is, of course, the global HFC production phase down under the global Montreal Protocol. So far, 143 out of 198 parties have signed on to the Kigali Amendment, with more joining every month, which is very positive. But there is, of course, more we can do to reduce HFC emissions. One of those is to early domestic action to reduce HFC demand through a faster HFC phase down. Then there's the action to reduce the amount of equipment imported or manufactured using high global warming potential HFCs. There's the managing the use of the installed equipment to reduce emissions. And then, of course, there's recovery and destroying HFCs at their end of life. So in Australia, we've tried to use a combination of all these tools to reduce HFC emissions. Australia's HFC phase down was agreed in May 2016, slightly ahead of when the Kigali Amendment came into effect. And we started our phase down in 2018, a year ahead of the Montreal Protocol requirement. Our starting point for that phase down was 25% below our baseline. And we have reduction steps every 2 years, which is more than the protocol requirement. The philosophy behind those more frequent step downs in our HFCs is about providing that smaller and more frequent reduction steps, which are easier for industry to digest and respond to. So it's about providing that certainty for industry, and we think delivers overall greater impact. Australia will use 25% less HFCs than permitted under the protocol between 2019 and 2036. Australia has also sought to go beyond the Montreal Protocol and put in place additional requirements. And there are a few other things that have been touched upon in the earlier presentations. We have provisions for bans on the import and manufacture of equipment, which can be used to reduce the amount of equipment charged with HFCs as they enter into Australia. Obviously, that's good for Australia, but it also provides that broader signal about technology. In the past, Australian equipment manufacturers have been quick to move to less harmful alternatives, and bans have been used to support industry transition. We also ban the use of disposable refrigerant cylinders, which have been shown to be a large contributor to emissions. It is also in Australia an offence to deliberately emit a HFC refrigerant, including by repairing a piece of equipment including by recharging a piece of equipment before repairing any leaks. Beyond that as well, next slide, thanks. Also want to talk about the importance of workforce and skills. So in 2005, we set up a mandatory licensing for technicians working on refrigerations and air conditioning equipment. As has been discussed, the primary causes. This was to ensure that people working on this equipment were properly trained to install and maintain equipment to reduce preventable refrigeration leaks. These technicians are required to follow Australian standards and codes of practice, again, to avoid those preventable leaks. The licensing system has had the added benefit of improving the energy performance of equipment, which further reduces emissions. And again, having that skilled workforce who know how to follow codes of practice and industry standards. And this is the point that Japan touched on before. And technicians are also required to recover waste refrigerant and send it for disposal. Australia also has a scheme for managing refrigerants at the end of their life to ensure they're recovered and destroyed. HFC importers of equipment containing HFCs must be a member of product stewardship schemes. In Australia, we have one product stewardship scheme called the Refrigerant Reclaim Australia. It is industry owned, funded and operated, and is acknowledged around the world as being industry best practice. It was actually established all the way back in 1993, initially as a voluntary scheme to recover and destroy waste ozone depleting refrigerants. And in 2000, it was expanded to include HFC refrigerants. Product stewardship and technician requirements to recover refrigerants became mandatory in Australia in 2005. We saw a significant increase in the amount of refrigerant recovered. I think it's really interesting to note that Refrigerant Reclaim Australia, sorry, next slide actually, sorry, I think we're one off there, thanks. Interesting to note that Refrigerant Reclaim Australia is actually entirely industry funded. So it's funded through a small levy on all imported refrigerants. That levy is then used to pay sort of a bounty or a fee for technicians to recover the refrigerants and fund the destruction at the end of life. So as I sort of flagged at the very start of my presentation, I think an important hallmark of our approach in Australia and what's made it successful has been that governments and industry have worked very closely together since the Montreal Protocol was agreed and have continued to work together closely to manage HFCs. Australian industry, and I sort of mentioned the originations of some of the industry schemes, they actually saw the need to change well before the Montreal Protocol, firstly away from ozone depleting refrigerants and now away from HFCs. Industry developed two of Australia's most important initiatives, the technician licensing and product stewardship schemes, as well as the voluntary mechanisms. And then later on, the government has changed these into mandatory requirements to increase industry participation. The major benefit for industry of this approach is, of course, long-term policy certainty and consistency, which allows those change of behaviours and investments. To summarize, I just want to touch on a few of the key learnings from our experience. That four-pronged approach I talked about has had significant impact on reducing our HFC emissions, including to reduce broader energy-related emissions by having a skilled workforce and more efficient equipment. Voluntary schemes in this area work, but a much larger benefit can be achieved when they're supported by regulation. The approach we've taken has benefited the environment, consumers, and the economy, so a lot of co-benefits to the way we've done it. That's everything I was going to talk through today. Thanks for listening. And looking forward to hearing from everyone else.
Thank you very much, Sam, for introduction of the Australia's experience. Actually, well, the Australia has been a very visible, the leading country in the Kigali negotiation, but also in this climate areas. We work very closely with each other, but also for the international cooperation in the cooling sector. We've been actually quoting Australia's domestic experience, especially for the lifecycle management approach, as Sam mentioned. And then in the resource book, we published with the CCAC, we actually have a couple of Australia's domestic policy and measures cases. So that is actually really interesting, and we really thank for the contribution by the Australian government in this regard. Thank you very much, Sam, for a very nice introduction. Next, what we originally were planning to have Ms. Namita Prasad, who's a joint secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forestry, and Climate Change, India. But today is a sort of like one of the busiest day for negotiators, and she's actually stuck in the negotiation room. So unfortunately, she had to cancel her participation in the last minute. But we got a very warm message from her that wishing a very success of this workshop. So, I think it's good to have India on board together as part of the Quad countries. Yeah. Then I would like to invite Ms. Monica Medina, who's the Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Ocean and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, Department of States, United States of America. So Monica, please.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here. Thank you to Japan for hosting us. Thank you to Gabrielle, for that wonderful talk on the science. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a technical expert in this topic. So I always learn something when I hear the experts talk about this. And thank you to our other Quad partners, Japan and Australia and India, as well, for making this part of our Quad working group. I'm honored to be here today to share our expertise on reducing hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, and discuss how our actions will support global efforts to tackle the climate crisis. You've heard all this from the other speakers. These are super polluting gases that are hundreds to thousands of times more powerful than carbon dioxide. They're man-made. They're used in refrigerators in our cars and foams and all kinds of aerosol propellants. But while they make up only 1% of total greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but the increasing demand for air conditioning and refrigeration has led them to become one of the fastest growing greenhouse gases, something that we really needed to get ahead of. More production and consumption of HFCs means more emissions in the atmosphere, countering other efforts to avoid further global temperature rises, which is why we needed to phase down HFC production and consumption and replace it with global warming, high global warming potential HFCs with the next generation of refrigerants, combined with improvements in energy efficiency. And those things can help reduce our emissions and prevent even further temperature rises from happening. This is a vicious circle. If we didn't get ahead of this, if we didn't stop creating this problem, we would only be making our challenge more and more difficult. Which is why the global implementation of the Kigali Amendment is so important. It requires the parties to cut their production and consumption by more than 80% over the next 30 years, which is huge. And the world can prevent more than 70 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions by the middle of the century. That would allow us, as Gabrielle said, and that's important. It sounds like it's such a tiny amount, 0.1 degree, so small, and yet we're trying to stay within 1.5 degrees. So every 1/10 of a degree matters. And to avoid this 1/10 of a degree by 2050 would be huge. And again, on top of the already cascading problem that this would be if we weren't getting ahead of it, it would be even worse. But by doing this, by setting us on this path, we will avoid 1/2 a degree of or more of warming by the end of the century. So that's why this was all so important. There can also be some indirect benefit from a global HFC phase down. For example, we can improve energy efficiency of the equipment we design as replacements and related reductions in other air pollutants. So there's more than just the benefit for climate in this one particular area. We can also benefit from reduced energy consumption and again, reduce our emissions from currently greenhouse gas emitting energy consumption. So there are many, many reasons why the US is very excited to be taking full advantage of this climate mitigation opportunity by using the Montreal Protocol's institutions, particularly the Multilateral Fund, where we can maximize the climate benefits of the HFC phase down to gain even more benefits than what I already said. So not only do we have the benefit from the new chemicals, but we also are benefiting from the institution of the Montreal Protocol itself by creating the tools and the capability for other countries to also phase down. And another way that we can maximize the climate benefits is to increase the capture and reuse of the HFCs already in our refrigerants and our refrigerators and air conditioning equipment. Another thing that our other speakers have talked about. So we're very excited to see all the different ways that we can use the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment to improve our climate future. And I think the most interesting thing about this, and the thing I hope that is even more used in the future, is the notion of circularity, which we don't see enough. And if we aren't careful, we could repeat some of the same mistakes we're making again if we are not thinking about circularity in everything that we do to combat the climate crisis. So the big news for us in the US is that after many, many years of struggle and work on the Hill to persuade members of Congress that this was the right thing to do, I'm very proud to say that in the last month, the United States ratified the Kigali Amendment. That means we achieved a goal of ours, which was to become a full-fledged member of the Kigali institutions. And this paves the way for further global efforts by the US to reduce HFCs through innovation and the manufacture of HFC alternatives. For us, and the selling point for us was that it's about jobs. It's about spurring economic development by supporting an estimated 33,000 new jobs just in our country alone. And we know that that's just a fraction of what it's creating all around the world. So we're just glad now to be fully a member and able to take advantage of that. That generates for us in our government, in our economy, 12.5 billion in new investments in clean technology to solve the climate crisis over the next decade. These are technologies that we hope to be able to scale and expand to other countries to give more countries access to energy efficient products and low GWP alternatives. And it's going to reduce the demand for HFCs by facilitating the transition to the next generation technologies through sector-based restrictions. So the US is working very hard to phase down super polluting HFCs domestically. And we've been doing this already for a while. Even though we hadn't ratified the Kigali Amendment, we had put in place the domestic legislation. It was called the 2020 American Innovation and Manufacturing, or AIM Act. And the elements of the AIM Act are how the US has implemented this provision domestically. They aim to control the production and consumption of HFCs and reclaim and reuse HFCs domestically that have already been produced. The AIM Act provisions on increasing opportunities for reclamation and releases are new for the HFC phase down as compared to other ozone depleting substances covered by the Montreal Protocol. And it shows that there's a growing recognition that this area is important for managing our refrigerant transitions and ensuring we are not leaving additional emissions reductions on the table. Like all aspects of the HFC phase down, efforts to minimize emissions require close cooperation with our industry stakeholders. And rest assured that these efforts will contribute to achieving HFC emissions reductions and help us meet our climate goals. We appreciate the work undertaken by so many other countries that have ratified the Kigali Amendment. And we are working on ways to reduce our own HFCs. Through our joint efforts, we will transition the world toward a net zero economy. We must do everything we can to ensure we are successful in reducing HFCs and becoming more adaptive and resilient to climate change. And I'll just close by saying, I remember when I started working in this field, the growing fear around the ozone hole. And we thought we had solved it. And we thought we had come to the answer. There was a silver bullet, except there wasn't. And so we always have to me, that was a really big lesson in the whole climate debate and struggle and challenge. We can never think that we have found the silver bullet. We can never rest on some old technology. We may unwittingly have done something that causes a condition in some other area of the climate crisis that we will be making things worse for ourselves in. And so to me, this is a lesson, a good early lesson for us to learn in the climate struggle, which is we can't really ever let down our guard. We always have to be looking for those unintended consequences of the things that we think are solutions. We need to be thinking about circularity all the time, because if we aren't thinking that way, we are wasting and we are polluting something somewhere. So with that, I will say thank you again very much for the organizers. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm really thrilled that the US is now a full-fledged member of this wonderful agreement and all the institutions that go with it. So thank you again to our organizers. And I'm very pleased to have listened to this wonderful discussion today.
Thank you, Monica. Well, we really congratulate for the United States will finally will join the Kigali Amendment, and I think this is sort of like a landmark moment for ozone and climate community, and I think we can work further to control HFCs, but as she said, and I think it is not only like environment, but also it's also about the job creation or introduction of new technologies. And I think we have multiple benefits of promoting for the life cycle management of HFCs and other refrigerants control. So I really, really like thank you for introducing your domestic efforts today. Now, the next session is further exciting. Well, we are diving into the panel discussion. So for the panel discussion, we have speakers for so far, but also, well, we should not forget about the Asian Development Bank, because for ADB has been the standing the opening member of the initiative on life cycle management of fluorocarbons. And here we are very happy to have the ADB representative, Mr. Woo Jong-un. And then, well, I still remember, well, you were with us in Madrid for COP25 when the IFL was established or announced by our minister, Mr. Koizumi. So I really want to congratulate also for the very successful engagement of the ADB. So now I would like to invite all of the speakers on the front area to start for the panel discussion. So Mr. Ono, yeah. And also Gabriel next. Yes. And also Sam. And also okay, Monica, and also yes, Mr. Rum. Yes, thank you very much. Okay. I think it looks better if we have same direction. I think rather than podium, well, I think it's good to see your face like this. So today we have excellent speakers for the panel discussion again, and we have prepared for 3 different questions, so that I would like to pose on the screen, well, the guiding questions. But I think this session can be very interactive, so that having for the guiding questions, well, we are asking for those throwing this question to the panelists. But also after that, well, you're welcome to raise questions, comments, and also expectation to all of us for our further collaboration together. So first, I would like to read out the questions posed. Sorry for the panelists, well, you cannot actually see. So, but this is a very informal setting, so that yes, maybe we can take a picture of having the panelists for saying that question. So I would like to read out the 3 questions. You can take any of this as you like, but okay, I would like to start with the first question. What kind of actions do you emphasize to reduce HFC emissions in your country or organization? The question number 2 is, what is the next areas of your focus to accelerate HFC emissions reduction in the context of net zero emissions? And the third question, are there any suggestions regarding global efforts on HFC emissions reduction, including on the initiative on fluorocarbons life cycle management, IFL? So that this is very sort of like a soft question so that you can frame those questions as you like, and also you can maybe modify your these questions for in your own context. Yes. So I would like to start for requesting, well, maybe Mr. Woom, because yes, well, you're a very important partner in this event.
Hello, yes, can you hear me okay? Yeah, thank you very much. And I think this panel, I would rather listen and learn than talk too much, because you know, as I was listening to Gabrielle and everyone, this is the time when I wish that I had paid more attention during their chemistry class in school. And you know, if I'd gone through this and go to school, then I would actually be paying much more attention in chemistry. But it's really important for us to learn, you know, the kind of impact that we can have in our developing countries in harnessing this kind of opportunity. So my response is not going to be particular to any one of them, but I'll give you a broad response. See, the Asian Development Bank is set up to help reduce poverty in our developing countries. And, you know, life was quite simple back then. It was 50 something years ago, you know, build roads and, you know, power plants and, you know, do all that, and people get better. Everybody was poor. There are not too many air conditioners in, you know, in Asia back then. But in 2022, it's not that simple anymore. So this climate change is not the ultimate objective, but it's an essential element to achieve the poverty, because unless we do address climate change, we cannot develop countries properly. So, you know, we do have a lot of projects and programs, and our climate finance ambitions are about $100 billion for the next 10 years. And large number of those investments go into infrastructure and things like that. So, you know, we don't build, you know, refrigerants or anything like that. So in this, you know, HFC space, we still have a huge role to play, because we can do two things. One is at the policy level, you know, from the scientific, you know, evidence and know-how, you know what the developing countries need to do at the country level in terms of setting the regulatory framework. And that's where we come in. You know, when we establish $100 billion, a big chunk of that, we're planning to use it for this thing called the policy-based loans, which we provide to the countries so that they can develop, you know, based on very strong diagnostics, develop policies and regulatory framework so that these type of HFC can be managed properly. But a lot of these policy implementation development costs money. So this PBL, the policy-based loans, are developed so that we can actually facilitate that. And in this year and moving forward, you know, we have lots of PBLs, but we've never done climate change PBL until this year. And we've done our pilot one in the Philippines for $400 million as the first tranche. So that program has a suite of activities which addresses reducing greenhouse gases, all 6 of them plus, and also adaptation. So in this space, even though we may not have a project-specific investments, we can do a lot of work in terms of helping the developing countries establish regulatory framework so that HFC can be managed. So this Philippine PBL is being replicated in other countries, and my colleague here, Ginting, he's a country head of our Bangladesh office, and he's here to listen to you so that he can tell. We are meeting with the climate change minister right after this one, so we will be talking. So even though we are a bank, I think our biggest value addition is the relationship that we have with the developing countries. As a trusted partner, we will tell them and advise them, and sometimes give them the tough medicine so that they have a long-term sustainability. So that's the policy level intervention. But we also have very specific activities in leveraging carbon market. And carbon market, as you know, it's under Paris Agreement, Article 6. We can do this. And you know, from the Japanese government, we have this Japan Fund for Joint Crediting Mechanism, which we can have a very specific project level intervention to reduce HFC. but we're also setting up our own fund as well. So we can do that as well. So let me stop here and pass on the microphone to the next person.
Thank you very much, Mr. Well, now you see a lot is happening. Well, he says for his planning, but I think the ADB has done a lot already as a member of the IFL. And then I remember like 2 weeks ago, actually, we organized a joint workshop with the MOJ, Monre from Vietnam, and then Asia Development Bank was the co-organizers. And as he said, for the HFC destruction technology caught the huge attention by the Vietnamese policymakers, but also the suppliers, service people, and also the private companies. So that there are, we actually will confirm the strong potential in Asian developing countries for to work on these areas. So thank you very much. Well, Mr. Ung, so we can come back to you for further question. Okay, well now I would like to invite Ono-san.
Thank you very much, Kato-san, and thank you very much for all the speakers for joining us in this side event. And I will take a combination of the three and beyond. So let me first emphasize that as IEA estimates that the number of air conditioners will be tripled by the end of 2050. So that means that the HFC issues would be quite significant issues if we will not do anything on this issue. So thanks to the US and the EU, the awareness on the methane emission is growing and growing. So people are coming to aware of the importance of methane emission reductions, and a lot of actions are ongoing. But I think we need to raise awareness on the HFC as well, following the methane emission issues, because this is a quite powerful greenhouse gas emissions gases, and it is growing in the near future. So we need to be very careful on this emission reductions. My colleague Osawa-san has already, explained in detail about the Japanese policies, so I don't repeat that aspect on the first question. But I would like to emphasize the importance of, the life cycle management of HFCs. Because the Kigali Amendment is very powerful tool to control the production and consumption of HFCs, but still we have a bank issues remaining, and we are moving to the zero emission. It's a very high ambition, zero emission issues by 2050. So we need to be very careful about the remaining HFC gases in appliances and equipment. And we are actually struggling to persuade, a business sector why they should, take care of the, emission, the reduction from the leakage of their appliances. They might think that it's not their business, or they want to forget about that. It's not, anything important for their business. But I believe that's not true, because from the incentive side, if you use appliances which have less amount of HFC refrigerant, then the performance of the appliances, performance of equipment will decrease significantly. That means that they consume more energies. That means that you need to pay more money for your energy, electricities. So if you prevent the release of HFCs from your appliances as early as possible, you can save money, you can save energy. So that's, I think, a great and good incentive to persuade any business sector and the users of the appliances to take care of the release of HFC emissions. So, but I do believe that this kind of awareness is not well received anymore. So we need to raise awareness and this kind of incentives to avoid emissions of HFCs, not only in Japan, but also all around the world. This is relates to the second one. And third one, we are working with several countries in Asia Pacific region like Cambodia, Vietnam, as well as Philippines. But the effort of the Japanese government is so limited. So we need to work with ADB and CCAC to expand and to replicate the the experiences and expertise on this aspect towards all around the world. So that's the point we are looking for. That's why we are very much looking forward to working with CCAC as well as ADB to expand our efforts to the world. So that's what I relate to the third question and the how we can expand the activities of IFC. So I think the collaboration with CCAC, ADB, and any other like-minded organizations and like-minded countries are crucial in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ono-san. I think the MOJ has been putting both energy tremendously on this areas, and it's been very successful. We started with a small number of group of countries organization, but I think it's expanding. And I think also we have been delivering for the tangible outputs and probably outcomes for the our partner countries for in Asian developing nations. Well, they have amended laws and they are now introducing like a systems in this regard, so that the we didn't expect for that comes for so early, but now we're ready to reduce greenhouse gas, very powerful greenhouse gas such as HFCs. And I think also incentive is very important. And then Japan is promoting for the joint crediting mechanism to support for the decarbonizing technologies on the grounds. All right, thank you very much, Ono-san. So now I would like to invite Gabrielle, maybe.
Got it? Yeah, all right. So I'm here again representing the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So we don't have these policies. We work with governments and practitioners to help countries learn from one another to implement these policies. But we're working with Japan, for example, on this initiative on life cycle management. We also have a cooling hub where governments can come together and with implementing agencies, funders to identify and learn from one another on the opportunities. And I just want to add one point in terms of scale, just to take this back to the conversation. The Montreal Protocol held its 35th meeting of the parties just last week. Wow, last week. Okay, time flies. And there's actually a lot of discussion on this question of life cycle management. And there was a report presented by the Environmental Investigation Agency, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development that actually quantified as 90 billion metric tons the potential of avoided emissions if we get this right. And that is future HFCs, the existing HFCs in our equipment now, and there are still ozone depleting substances out there that are existing and continuing to emit. So that's 90 billion tons opportunity. I think the annual emissions are what, are we at like 60-ish, 55 gigatons CO2e right now? So it's a lot. And just again, and to put that in perspective, that 0.1 degrees by 2050 is actually comparable to what we could get out of reducing methane emissions, which is also super important from the oil and gas sector. So this is real. And we heard examples from Australia in particular of the importance actually of industry engagement, but also voluntary activities, but also the role of regulatory policies and how those work together to create the necessary incentives so that the servicing technician who comes to your house to service your AC has the right incentive to take the time to, because this is how it works, right? The servicing technician has to come and plug into your AC and evacuate, suck all of the gas in the line. And that actually takes time. And it's a lot easier if no one is looking. So this is not, what does an HFC look like? It looks like CO2 to us. We don't see it. This is a CO2 monitor, by the way, because I'm a total geek. I keep this in my pocket. But we don't see those HFCs. So it's actually, even when you have regulation in place, no one is looking over the shoulder. If we don't have the right incentives in place, and it's not easy for the servicing technician to take the time to collect. And I'm just thinking about what Monica was saying as circularity. Circularity is so important here. We have, I think Al Gore actually said this a few days ago, we have a tendency to treat the atmosphere as an open sewer because we don't see these things. Imagine if there was a purple cloud that happened every time someone serviced an AC. Someone might notice, and we would probably have the policies and such in place. So we don't have that visibility. So we need to work with Asian Development Bank, work with partners who know how to put in place that trifecta of the voluntary programs, the licensing and certification, the regulatory requirements, these incentives, so that those technicians, when they come to your house to do that servicing, but also upstream, like you were saying, the responsibility of the manufacturers. So I'm not really answering these questions, but I'm trying to provide context here again to why it's so important for all of the countries that are in the Quad, but also to share the experience. And I mentioned the Montreal Protocol meeting last week. One of the really positive developments, like I said, was there were a lot of presentations. There are a lot of companies that are involved in this space, that circularity, who see value in collecting and recycling some of these gases as some of these phase down schedules come into place. Some of the legacy chemicals are going to become harder and harder to access. And if you have an air conditioner that uses a legacy chemical that still has operating life and it's efficient, because efficiency is also very important, making sure that you have access to those is a piece of this puzzle. And I am thinking the circularity. This is all about closing that loop so that we can avoid that 90 billion tons of emissions.
Thank you very much. So the question is whether we're missing this 90 billions or not. And I think, this is something what we can do as a low-hanging fruit here. But here, the problem is, the awareness is not necessarily high as we expect yet. So it's coming up, and we need your support. We need your help to disseminate this benefits of this opportunity to tackle this very powerful gas emissions reduction in a very short term. So this is, thank you very much. I really agree with you. Okay, Sam, please.
Thank you. So I want to start, I guess, with a little bit of maybe a reflection on our experience and how we're sort of learning from that in other aspects, and I think what it means more broadly for mitigation efforts. And I think it's to do with, and you sort of touched on this as well, the interplay between strong regulation, good government action, and industry action. But I'd add into that, I guess, the impact that has on social license for these changes. So the anecdote is, I grew up in South Australia, which is an incredibly hot place. In the peak of summer, it's regularly 40, pushing 45 degrees, often for days and days at a time. And there is nothing worse than getting in your car and trying to drive and trying to turn the air conditioner on, and it's sort of just like breathing out lukewarm air. It's horrid. It's horrible. But it also has real world health impacts on people, particularly, at the moment with really, really high energy prices. And that feeds into health issues, social issues, and a whole range of other factors. And I think what's been helpful in our situation is the fact that we do have this sort of this co-driven effort between industry and government, which means that when your technician comes to fix, or you go to the mechanic and ask them to fix your air conditioning, not only do they have the incentives, but they also understand the benefits of it and can communicate that to the consumer, which builds that long-term support for the actions in a way that it just becomes a sort of a neutral issue and you just get on with it. I think that doesn't mean you can be complacent. I think clearly the Kigali Amendment shows, we need to be monitoring this and staying on top of it. But I think in Australia, in the HFC space, I think we've got the right settings. But I think now we're thinking about, well, what can we learn from that and apply to other sectors? So I think really importantly in Australia, and this is quite a recent thing, is that we've now taken the time to legislate our emissions reduction targets, sort of economy-wide, which provides that really top-down signal. Underneath that, we're also thinking about, well, how can we take that sort of co-government, co-industry approach? One of the signature pieces we've got is a sort of emissions intensity scheme for some of our really large industrial producers. Now, really central to reducing those emissions is also energy efficiency, which comes back to a very similar point in the HFC space around skills and people. Often the biggest and the most influential people in the energy efficiency space are the engineers, technicians on site, making those day-to-day operational decisions and investment decisions. And I think, thinking about them and trying to do their job, it's about having that top-down signaling, there's incentives in place, but then also taking the time to invest in the skills and working with industry to understand their pathways. So I think, and again, that builds that long-term social license. So when we're talking about mitigation, governments are able to communicate those benefits. I think the other point I'd make is, and I was on a panel last night talking about linkages between mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts. And I think, I forget who it was, but someone made a really, really good point, is we often think about these things in different categories of action to respond to climate change. And I think in a lot of ways, that kind of misses the bigger picture about a lot of times the actions have a lot of benefits, and we need to be better at communicating that in a holistic way. And I think, when we're talking about HFCs, for all the reasons discussed before, I think we need to do better at communicating. This isn't just about mitigation. This is also about energy efficiency, reducing your energy bill, and improving performance. And I think that's a much better and cohesive story to be telling people.
Thank you very much, Sam. I really agree with you. Yeah, well, okay. So Monica, please.
Yes, there it is. Yeah. So I'll tackle the three questions. I'll be a bit mindful of your request. The first answer I have is not one that I came up with, but it is one from our technical experts that I wanted to raise, which is that HFC 23 is the highest global warming potential HFC and a serious threat. And so again, in this sort of, we can never rest, we can never sort of relax and think, oh, we got it all solved. This is the one of the HFC pollutants that we hope that other countries will, and the Montreal Protocol will start to tackle. We know there was a decision at the Montreal Protocol meeting a week ago, so to try and gather more information, which is really important. We don't want to act until we know, but we shouldn't wait either. If we know that it's a problem, we should start to get it out of circulation as well. So just want to say, never let down our guard. I'm going backwards in order, so sorry about that. What's our next area of focus? It's in actually depositing our instrument. We have put our instrument, we have deposited our instrument to join the Kigali Amendment in New York at the UN. So for us, that's a big moment and a real opportunity for us to really lean into the to the amendment itself and to being part of the international organization, implementing it. That's really our top focus. And when I think about this problem, I do think about the growth in the need for air conditioning. When you look at the incredible hot conditions in places where they haven't been seen before, the UK and their incredible heat wave, the Europeans who are used to hot summers, but not baking, and our Pacific Northwest really struggling. And then areas, of course, that have, as I said, been used to hot summers or hot seasons and now face a much more challenging situation. This is a high growth area. When we talk about regulation that just imposes costs and doesn't have huge upside for businesses. Usually they just try to find a way around it. But for this one, and this was the key to us getting the Kigali Amendment ratified, which requires a supermajority of our Congress. To get it ratified, we had to show that there was a business case. And not only would we be saving money through better efficiency in our air conditioning systems, but we would also be saving money through the development or gaining profits through the development of these new technologies that would be adopted, not only just where they are now, but in increasingly huge market for air conditioning. So the power of the market, as long as we can make sure that we aren't hurting certain communities, that we are helping the people who need it the most, can really be our best friend in making the transition in the climate space.
Thank you very much. Yep. Okay, so now maybe from the floor, maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions or comments. Okay, now hands up. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Zarin and I'm from IDST, and I'm very curious to ask a question to all the country representatives of Quad. So we have Japan, we have Australia, we have the United States, and unfortunately we don't have India here. But then all of you, the 3 countries, are A2 members under the Montreal Protocol. And like Dr. Dreyfus said, we have a 90 million metric tons of opportunity by the end of the century. Banks being the one area that can give you that opportunity to close the sort of cycle here. While we face challenges in the negotiations about financing from A2 countries requested by A5, my home country, India, what are the different financial mechanisms that you could work with? Are you thinking or strategizing of using Quad to be the next perhaps effective platform to coordinate with India on how to develop financial mechanisms to essentially put in place incentives, like you said, to close the gap on end of life and banks?
Thank you very much. My name is Francisca. I'm from Ghana. I love everything I heard, and it was wonderful listening to all of you and the beautiful things that you said. My issue or question is that I'm just looking at the panel right now. There's no representative from Africa. And let me put it this way, without any offense, but when it comes to the HFC, Africa is a dumping site for the developed countries. And here we are, you beautifully have solutions, you have examples, you are working it out. But the people who are the victim of what the solutions that you have found are not even here. They are not even in your panel. They don't even have the experiences to even talk of the technical know-how to handle what you cause and dump on them. So my question here is, with all these beautiful solutions that you have identified, what is it for Africa? And how is Africa, especially my country, Ghana, that, for instance, if a refrigerator costs $100, we, the poor ones, can get the used one to buy at $10, which is full of, it's just a poison material that we are carrying to our house. Yes, there's regulation, but you should understand that in developing countries like Africa, yes, we can work with the regulation, but we are also looking at the needs of the less privileged, which you just mentioned. Global warming, the place is getting hot, and even the poor people still refrigerate, they need air conditioning. So in all this, where is the place of Africa in all these your beautiful plans? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the 2 questions. For are there any are you going to take a response or maybe? Okay.
Well, thank you for your questions. And now finally we have Indian colleagues in this room. And on the financial mechanism, I think the Montreal Protocol has its own financial support programs to developing countries. And on top of that, as Uchon mentioned, Japan has a joint crediting mechanism, and now we are talking with Indian government whether we can have a partnership. It's a bilateral mechanism that we can have a negotiation on whether the Indian government is willing to participate in that program, and we can put HFC abatement programs under the JCM if we can have a partnership. So on the issue of African nations, yes, that's quite right. And for Japanese perspective, we are mainly working with Asia-Pacific countries, but we are closely working with CCAC. And I'm not 100% sure, but there's African country members in the CCAC, and through the CCAC program, African countries could also benefit from the experience from our the countries as well as Asia Pacific countries.
So I thank you both for those questions. They were excellent. What I would say is through our Quad partnership, we're hoping, and now your countries in India leading the G20, I think there's an opportunity for them to drive this further, actually, this sense of how do countries that are in the worst position in terms of becoming hotter have a stake or a say. And I would encourage you to use the leadership in that and our Quad partnership to push us harder with respect to Africa and India both. What I will also say is the other day at the US Pavilion, we had one of our largest air conditioning manufacturing companies come and help us open the pavilion. And they were here actually in the region to announce the opening of factories in India and in here in Africa. I don't believe in Ghana, but here in Africa, to create more air conditioning products and more jobs here, creating air conditioning products that will help the people here. So I hope that this kind of a demand for a new product that will make us less vulnerable to climate change and will provide the technology and the jobs here to actually create the conditions that you need to be able to live will be a start. And hopefully there'll be more and more and more. And, that's I think the best answer I have now, but we will continue to work on it. So keep holding us to that, please.
Thank you very much. I think we're so that maybe we're closing. But I think this is evidence of what we want to do and how much we want to do. So I think we after this, you're invited to stay in this pavilion. Then we can continue to discuss. But sorry, we have to close this event. But thank you very much for questions and also for the discussion, for your active participation. But now I would like to have Mr. Woon to give a final statement. Well, you can stand. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a really learning experience, and I'd like to, Your Excellency, Vice Minister Ono, and distinguished colleagues, thank you for being here. As a representative of the Asian Development Bank, this is a really important topic. So, this is something that we need partners like yourselves to be able to work with us so we can help our relationship. We can use our relationship with our countries and our banking ability to make it bankable at the end of the day. So as it was mentioned, I was here 3 years ago, about 2 COPs ago, at the launch of this initiative on Fluorocarbons Lifecycle Management. It's a pleasure to be here to continue to support. And as I mentioned earlier, this Quad governments and the intergovernmental organizations working upstream and downstream efforts are critical to get this right. So I know it's late, so I just wanted to reiterate our commitment to be part of this initiative so that we can play a role in this very important topic. So thank you very much for having us here and looking forward to staying in touch. And if I need any technical experts, I'll call you and you can come back to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for, so I think that this concludes for this event with a very successful. Thank you very much for your active participation. Yeah, also maybe what we can stand up and then take a shot of photos.